Welcome to our town. Dorothy Thompson speaking to you today from Pine Valley Community Village. Housing is the topic of our show, and some milestones for housing in our community. Well, we're going to talk with Kathy Lenz from Neighborhood Housing Services. She's the director, and there's some milestones they're reaching. She's going to share those with us. Well, we're in the community room of the Park Apartments, and we're going to talk to Kathy from NHS, and we're going to find out a lot about Neighborhood Housing Services. Over the years, they're getting ready to celebrate their 40th anniversary of NHS and Neighbors Week. So, Kathy.
Hi there. So glad to have you here. Welcome to NHS, Neighborhood Housing Services of Southwest Wisconsin.
And for people who don't know you, just very briefly, tell us who you are and what you do.
I am the Executive Director of Neighborhood Housing Services of Southwest Wisconsin. I've been here just over a year. So, but someone asked me this morning, they said, so you're going to talk about all the new stuff we're doing? I said, well, actually, we're going to talk about all the old stuff we've been doing over the years. And they're like, what? Because it's our opportunity to kind of show a little bit about the history. Because some folks have been a little surprised. They're like, wait, you guys have been around a long time.
That is a long time, 4 decades, yep. So first of all, 40th anniversary, do you plan a celebration?
Well, this particular week is NeighborWorks Week. So we are a part of NeighborWorks America, which is a national organization, an intermediary organization, who has connections over in every state of the country, working on housing. They're one of several housing intermediary organizations. We happen to be a charter member, so back in 1983, when Neighborhood Housing Services of Richland Center started, they were the very first rural NHS for the NeighborWorks system, and we were also the model that they used later. At this point, probably about 50% of the organizations and charters are rural.
Wow.
But much of what they tell me that they based that on was what was it that NHS and Richland Center was doing. Because they looked at us and said, you guys are the people in the forefront. How do we best go about this? Because it's a whole different thing to be in a rural area than it is to be in the inner city. So how do we think about housing in those particular settings?
So that was 40 years ago, and there's another event or week to recognize, and that's Neighbors Week.
Actually, that's the NeighborWorks Week is the week that we're here to celebrate this week. So
there have probably been many changes to NHS over the decades, and also to housing needs for people over the decades.
Exactly.
And you have a program here that you can share with us and show us. Take us through the decades.
Okay. I'm going to give you a quick introduction in the first few slides, and then to give you a look at some of the different lines of business that we've been working on over the years. It was actually a lot of fun to pull some of this information together. I got to go through a lot of the old annual reports, a lot of the just the historical information. So back in 1983, local citizens organized in order to form the Neighborhood Housing Services of Richland Center. They realized it as a nonprofit organization. David Harris was the founding director, and they also mentioned here some of the different community leaders who really helped get this going. Between Ray and Stan, they were some of the folks that really took this on and said, let's get this happening. In 1983, they actually changed their name. So even in the same year, they decided, you know what, this is a bigger thing. I mean, this is more than just Richland Center. Let's go to Neighborhood Housing Services of Richland County. And the Park Hotel Apartments were actually launched as the very first project that they did. It's been, I'll talk a little bit more about the neighborhood, what's been happening there, but they continue to grow as additional projects were added. New home construction became a flagship activity of what they do, as well as a portion where they did self-help building in Sextonville in the late 1990s. Officially, we started the Home Ownership Center. That's one of the things that I've noticed all the way through is that whenever NeighborWorks America launched a new project nationally, NHS was always at the forefront to say, and we're going to sign on too. We want a part of that deal. This is something that's going to help us. So they also led the efforts with Viola when they had the tornado and flood.
I think it's interesting. People may think that you mostly work in Richland Center, but already Viola, Sextonville, areas around here.
Exactly, and that just kept going because there was such a great need out there. So it became of course, we're going to roll up our sleeves and get out there. Now, Terry Tesla was the executive director for a number of years, and what I thought was fascinating in looking through the documents is just the recognition and the innovation that he brought to this conversation. They actually, in their 25th anniversary back in 2008, stepped into going green, making sure that we were environmentally sound and thinking, how would we design that as part of what we do in the housing that we do? They also got involved with Ho-Chunk because they looked at this and said, you know, here's another whole community that really needs help with housing. And together, they helped them develop their own housing and community development agency. They helped do it together, and they now stand on their own and are operating in a great way for the community in that area. So again, that was something that NHS would like to take a look at and say, how do we be partners, but then how do we bring those resources to others so we can have even more of this going on? And I think it's interesting that they got an award then with the John F. Kennedy Community Building and Organizing Center, that they actually got a chance to get that set up. So just a tremendous innovation at that particular moment. William Reinke was the executive director just before me. And during his time, they began working on eHome America for online homebuyer education in English and Spanish. Now, at the time that they stepped into that, they had no idea COVID was coming down the pack, and they would be absolutely critical that we had that online option available to us. But they knew enough to say, you know, if this is where the road is headed, we're going to start stepping into that. And we actually would have, at this point, more people who prefer to do classes online than necessarily doing them in person. So knowing that that was a possibility was a real opportunity. They also transitioned. They used to be doing mainly the new construction, the stick houses, and they went to purchase and rehabbing of homes so they could then resell those and make sure that we, again, are improving the housing stock in this area. And of course, he had to ride out the storm during COVID. That was a challenge for a lot of folks.
It was for all of us, all around the world.
And the last slide, as myself, I started here last year as the executive director. During my time so far, WIDA has awarded us new funds so that we can really help communities of color become homeowners. Taking a look at some of the folks in Southwest Wisconsin, we have a growing community, and becomes the question of what can we do to make sure that they have access, that it's something that they can afford, that they understand what are going to be the requirements. As we have more and more people coming in from other countries, how banking happens here is not necessarily how cash is handled other places. So it's a whole new process to really understand how does this work. I was talking with one of the community leaders, and she said, you know, Kathy, I have people here who they pay everything with cash. And they're like, well, I'll just go buy a house. And they're like, no, you won't. What's your credit score? My what? You have to have a credit score. You have to be able to pull a credit report. All of those realizations of how do we help people be ready so they can, in fact, purchase a home. So that's part of what we do. And that's, you know, the quick snapshot, if you will, of what's been going on. Now, if it's okay, I'm going to take you into the different lines.
I think that'd be great.
So, the Park Hotel is pretty much what most people know us for. In fact, I read into residents here who were like, you mean you do something other than the park? What could you possibly be doing? So I was actually just sharing some of these slides with one of the residents before you came, and he was like, I had no idea. This is amazing. But the Park Hotel, this particular building was built in 1874. And it has been a lot of things. It's been the hotel, it's been a restaurant and a boarding house, and now it's senior apartments. That's something that they took a lot of pride in, because this is a great location within town and an opportunity to say this is where seniors would want to be, in the heart of all the action. Now, interesting enough, this is what it looked like back in 1874. And this building right here is actually the Park Hotel. Some people look at that and go like, it has a wood outside. Wait, how can this be? Let us get to that particular part. But it's kind of interesting just to kind of see like where it started from. I'm a history buff, so this kind of stuff
Yes,
I'm
I
just
like stuff like this. Supper
And I love
and
that.
music, $2 a couple. That's a really good price.
Back then they probably thought, well, that's a little high.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, in 1899, the owner then, William Kirsch, actually moved the building back. He put a brick facade on, put the big porch on, and the two towers. So that looks a lot more like what we know today. But I do think it's interesting that a tomahawk was discovered during the excavation. I'm like, interesting. Of course, we can't talk about the Park Hotel and not talk about John F. Kennedy and the fact that he stopped and stayed here and spoke here during his presidential campaign, and that was in 1959. And actually, people will often see the picture as they come in. This is the part that I think is so fascinating. The weddings and the anniversary parties and birthday parties and family gatherings. Oftentimes when people come in to actually come see some of the apartments, they'll tell me about, well, when we were here back when we were kids, this is the event we had. And they said, those apartments that are back there, that used to be the dance hall. And we had a lot of good dances out this way. And I just think, I love the history that, you know, this place had such vibrancy. Then in 1930, the new owner at that point added the south and east sides. So a whole other section of the building was added, which again, much more like what we see today, but it's kind of interesting to think like how it kept growing as it went.
So right now we're in the 1930s.
Section, you're correct.
Yeah. Okay.
The porch is missing in here, but that was rebuilt in 1988. But I think again, it's kind of interesting to see the park across the top and what that looked like and what it looked like without some of the towers on the top. This was 1987, so this was the point where they took over the building. And it was interesting because I was talking to the Economic Development Board. The chairperson at the time said, I was on the board when you guys did that. He said, it was fascinating because this whole building had just become dilapidated. It was boarded up, people were throwing things through any glass that remained. It was in terrible shape. And he said, you know, it was an eyesore at that point, and that it was a huge fall from where it had been. And so he said, when this became an opportunity where they said, we're gonna take this on, we're gonna work to try to help the Richland Center look good and bring this back to life. That was a huge thing for the community to see that actually happen. And you can kind of see a little bit of what the porch looked like at that moment, how much shorter it was at that particular moment. And I think it's fascinating to see that any of the buildings that were in the back were demoed so that they could put in that parking space, take some of that out. They were building around, the apartments around they found, and 2 of the apartments actually had fireplaces in them.
Cool.
So they were redone in this particular fashion, but kind of gives you the sense of there was work to be done in all of these.
A lot of work it looks like, but some beautiful finds.
And I also think it was fascinating because people said to me, well, just show me a apartment. I'm like, I can't just show you a apartment. They built around whatever they found. There's no 2 apartments that are exactly the same. And of course, where we're sitting now is the old dining room for the boarding house. So it's interesting, and it had been at one point, this was also the Greyhound bus station.
Yes, I remember those days actually. I've bought Greyhound tickets here.
So again, just fascinating to see
We
the
used to
changes.
have bus service, yeah.
Well, and the fact that this was in the 1800s, this was the stop that they made for the stagecoach.
Yeah.
So what it looks like today in the finished awnings and towers, and I think they did a tremendous job with that particular part of the rehab process. And I just wanted to share, and I'm sorry it's not as clear in the big screen, but Andrea Lippens joined our team in 2023. She now is our coordinator for the Park Apartments as well as any other housing intake that we do. So someone who helps to shepherd and kind of keep an eye on the place as we go forward. But that's the Park Hotel, which is amazing to me of where it's been and the rise and fall and rise again as it may be along the way. Now, I also just briefly want to talk about the new construction and how that came into play. That actually ran from 1995 to 2015. I think it's fascinating that they built 53 houses from scratch during that period. All of those then became recognized as best practice by NeighborWorks America. They again were looking to neighborhood housing services to say, how are you doing this? And Wisconsin Energy Star and Green Build, they were certified in those areas back in the earlier days. Oh, I was curious because I'm like, so can I find any of these houses? And I actually did find one of them. This one sold in 2014 in Sextonville. But again, they were looking at it and saying, how do we build something that's appealing to families, that's affordable for what they can do, and yet consider some of the other things that we consider important, such as the energy and green build. So really a nice house, ultimately, in that line of the work. So that's just a sense of that construction, that new, and again, we're looking now to say, do we go back to that again? Because there's such a demand for housing at this point. But we're also taking a look and say, and how do we deal with that with the construction costs as they are, until such point as they come down a bit more.
Right, yeah.
Now in 2015 to 2021, Neighborhood Housing Services was involved in purchasing homes and rehabbing them. They switched from the new construction to the rehab process. In that particular case, and again, I was looking to say, so is there an example house that I could share with you? This one on 3rd Street sold for $129,000 when they were done with the rehab. They made sure that it was purchased only eligible for people who were at or under 80% average medium income here in Richland County. And again, it gives you a sense of what kind of amenities the house actually has. And of course, because I'm interested that way, I wanted to take a look and see what pictures could I find from the inside. And I think it was just a beautiful job of redoing the floors, the kitchen, the door was going out, the porch that actually got added in, the yard that got finished off. Just a very appealing house that was an affordable range for folks who were looking for that particular piece. So kind of fun to take a look back at the history. Neighborhood Housing also NeighborWorks started the home ownership centers across the country, and NHS jumped on board and said, and we're going to go too. Sign us up. So in 2003, they actually established a home ownership center here as well. And in that particular case, it's things like, what kind of counseling and education do we need to do for first-time home buyers? Can we help them with down payment assistance and closing costs? Can we help with them if there's rehab assistance that they need? If it's foreclosure prevention and intervention? If it's post-purchase counseling, like I bought this house, I caught it, I got it, but now I'm not entirely sure what I have to do to maintain it and keep it. So now what do I do? Or in some particular cases, we do have folks who occasionally call for reverse mortgage counseling. We still offer all of these services. So it's nice to see that, we still have those opportunities here for people in the area. And come up to July 1st, it's Richland Center, or Richland County only. Come July 1st, it'll be more of southwestern Wisconsin.
Okay.
So again, doing some adjusting as we go. I thought it was interesting as I look back in the history that in 2010, they actually got funding from HUD directly, and so they were already adding other counties: Iowa, Grant, Sauk, Lafayette, Greene, Juneau, and Moreau, and Jackson. And then they also got money from WIDA, so that gave them a chance to actually start to do some distance learning. So again, always stayed a little bit ahead of the curve of what kind of things should we be looking at? How do we take us to the next level? Johnny Hawkins is currently our Home Ownership Center coordinator. And I attended Robin Hood is someone who is one of the major decision makers on what happens for housing policy nationally, but he's also on the board of directors for NeighborWorks America. And he was speaking in Madison. And they were calling together people to specifically talk about communities of color and how we help them be home buyers and what are the things we're running into. And I have to admit, at that particular moment, I was struck by the fact that as people introduced themselves, they said, I'm the very first African-American person in this program lead. I'm the very first, and as it came around to us, I said, well, that's kind of interesting because I'm the very first woman leading NHS in the 40 years as the executive director. Johnny Hawkins is the very first African-American woman leading NHS as the Home Ownership Center coordinator. Tamika Keys is our very first African-American HUD certified counselor, all happening within this last year period. And so I think he said it best. He said, I'm happy that I'm the first, but I'm a little sad that I'm the first, that it took this long. And I think that's always something to take a look at and say, and how do we continue to step into the opportunities that we have? One of the other lines of business that we have is community building and organizing. That's where we're really trying to say, how do we help communities to come together, blocks come together, so that it's not just a house on the street, but there's interaction happening. And we're also doing that same kind of thing here in this building, because it says, yes, it's 23 apartments, but are we living as a community, encouraging one another, helping one another as we go forward? Because if you have a choice to live with just a house on a block or just an apartment in a building or having a whole community, most of us would prefer to have a whole community. So it really behooves us to take a look and say, what do we do in this particular area? And in this particular case, we've had partnerships with the City of Richland Center and Richland County, as well as some of the other counties, and we're expanding that in this last year even more. We've just reached out with Vernon County, we've been working with Sauk County, we've been talking to Grant and Iowa and Greene and Lafayette, trying to really make sure that we expand that reach as we go forward. And looking at and working on housing action teams to say, what is it we most need in all of our respective areas? What is it how can we actually help get that? Part of that has been doing the community impact measures. Now you've noticed that whenever NeighborWorks did it, which they launched it back in 2011, guess who was first ones in line and said, sure, we'll go. You notice the trend here? Because I am. And of course, we're working on this right now. But the community impact measures in this particular area, everybody here has probably heard of Walk with Grace. This is the Walk with Grace team who, in the previous 3 rounds, said, of course we'll be the volunteers who will help with this. So they did 3 different kinds of assessments. One was interviews with the different residents to say, so, how does it feel to be living here? Do you feel safe here? Do you feel welcome here? Do you feel like we have the amenities that we need? Does it feel like community or not? Or what is it that's happening? So it's really finding out from the residents, what is it like? And that's what we'll be working on later this summer to do that again. I'm actually still working for a few volunteers because they don't have that Grace team anymore. So looking for another nonprofit who might be interested in working with us on that. But the other thing that they do is a block assessment where they go through block by block and they say, so what are the conditions of these different blocks within the target area that we're trying to work with? Do we have any homes that have been abandoned? Have we got any areas that are in disarray? In the past, we haven't had a lot, but we have had some. And that's that opportunity to say, what do we do to address some of that? Because it's not the idea of what we'd like to see in some of our neighborhoods. And the other thing that they do when they do that walk around after talking to the residents is to take a look at each of the individual houses. In what shape are they? Are we in good housing stock? And of course, they're always like, don't bring in a housing inspector, they'll be too critical. But to the average person, check for these things. This is what we're looking for. To say, do we have the curb appeal that we would hope for? because that matters in when people decide to buy homes or not buy homes.
Sure does.
So we've been working ongoingly to make that available and hope to do so again. And as part of that data collection process, we find that by putting the word out, people start talking about affordable housing more, which is really important. Always take a look and say, how are we doing? And we also make a point to follow up to say, so what does this tell us about our local area? When you asked me earlier about, well, how do you decide what you work on? Because residents and others tell us, here's what we need to be focused on. Here's what we're concerned about. Here's where we think the opportunities are. So that's all part of that community development component. So just some highlights. I went through some of the annual plans to find out like what's been happening. And I thought it was interesting. Whoops, I went too fast, sorry. Back when they were Richland County, they said, our mission, we are neighbors helping neighbors committed to revitalizing our area communities by providing a range of affordable housing services. I was just at a meeting last month with the board, and the first thing they talked about is, well, we're neighbors helping neighbors. That hasn't changed for them. They're very clear that that's still what's the most important to us in what we do. I also thought it was interesting in that report is they gave a look back and say in the past 27 years, they served over 3,500 households. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
55 million, over 55 million in community reinvestment. 47 new workforce homes, and that was before they hit the ultimate 53. They were also, estimated they had 100 jobs that were enhanced or assisted. That's an amazing amount of numbers. Yeah. And then it's helpful for me to know to say, that was in 2010, where have we been even later than that? I thought it was interesting that they noted that in 2014, they changed their name to serve officially Southwest Wisconsin and 12 counties with a variety of programs. So that's when the official change went into play. And in the 2015 report, Rebecca Gomez was the assistant here for the Home Ownership Center. She talked about how she had been there for 7 years, and one of their big goals is working with the Spanish-speaking community. So already we were ahead of that curve and stepping into it now even more. I really appreciate the people who went before us, who laid a lot of the groundwork, which is always a helpful thing. So I asked NeighborWorks America, since they're a partner and they have all kinds of resources that they share with us, but as we do a look back over the last 5 years, and they said, just to the last 5 years, you're just shy of 65 million in the reinvestment in the local area. 499 homeowners created or preserved, 1,593 customers counseled or educated, the number of loans that we have, the 846,000, the number of individuals assisted with affordable housing and counseling, 2,217. I just think that's an amazing number of people. And then I was like, okay, as the new person on the block, I want to know what's happened in the last year. We are at just under 14 million just in the last year. 84 homeowners created and preserved. Those were the official numbers as NeighborWorks recognized them. We actually had some secondary sources that put us a little closer to 200. But they have certain criteria that they look for, and I honor that. 217 customers counseled and educated. So again, amazing amounts of work done in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So I also thought it was interesting because Terry Tuslin wrote back in 2015, these are our goals, these are what count to us. And I look at what's happening with the board now, the things that we're working towards, what keeps coming up, and we find that some of these things still hold true. We're working to maintain the Park Apartments as an exceptional place to call home, a focal point from the downtown area. Offer best in the region home ownership center services. That's that counseling, education, down payment assistance, and foreclosure and reverse counseling. Create community leaders through community-based initiatives. We just invited some of the different people from this particular area to join us as a team out in San Francisco for NeighborWorks because they're doing training around how do we come together for these kind of housing action teams. seek new partnerships to expand the range of affordable housing services. We just signed a brand new MOU with Southwest CAP out of Dodgeville to say, how can we be working together and jointly within these 5 county areas? We're talking with some of the different hospitals, some of the different county health programs, because they are recognizing that they can't address some of their health areas without addressing housing. So they're like, we so need to talk to you more and bring these conversations together and conduct our business in a way that honors our commitment to financial responsibility, human empowerment, and environmental stewardship. That's really the heart of it right there.
Right, it is. So you're looking for volunteers to help you with this?
For the community impact measures. Mm-hmm.
And you're also welcoming people who have questions or are thinking about housing? And
always, and any of the services that we just talked about, let us know, because if we aren't the source, we'll do our best to connect you to the people who are. And we've done that on occasion as well.
Okay. And now that's the past and the present. What do you see in the near future and the farther future for?
I see us doing a lot more with the Spanish-speaking community. As we've been talking about it with some of the other counties, the immediate question that I hear is that for all of Southwest County, Wisconsin, or just Richland Center? And I said, that's for Southwest. I've heard that from the USDA. I've heard that from some of the other federal partners saying, we don't so need to talk to you. There's such a need. So it's really beefing that up more as we go forward. We need new construction. We need continued rehab projects. So it's figuring out how can we do those in affordable ways, particularly when construction costs are so high. So it becomes the question of how can we help bring down those costs. That's where we've really talked a lot more to the USDA. They have a program for very low income, in which case, if you can't get a loan from a commercial bank, a mortgage lender, they will consider you at the USDA for a loan. And in that particular case, if we can help them through the paperwork process for that, right now the interest rate that I last heard that they're using is 4%, and the interest rate the payoff would be over 33 to 38 years, which brings your monthly payment down significantly. They have another secondary program that's called the Self-Help Program, which we used to belong to at one time. And they said, we'd love to talk to you about if we could bring that back. Because if people are helping each other build their homes, there are ways to bring down the costs on those homes. And again, help make them affordable. Now, sometimes people ask me, like, are you saying they're going to do all the work? No. Anything that requires a licensed contractor do that part of it. But there are plenty of sections that family members can help. And if you have 6 families coming together to help each other and making sure all of their sections are completed, it makes it a lot more available for folks in the area. And that's actually what they did back in Sextonville back in the day.
Now, do you see do most people want single family homes, or are they looking for apartments to rent?
I run into a lot of people who really would like to be able to buy and have their own home. Now, do we have a need for apartments as well? Yes. I would say that's especially among a lot of our employers. So we're looking to see because that's a little bit different construction build process. I myself have been going through as much training with WIDA and with NeighborWorks as I can to understand how would I have to do that capital stack. And what I mean by that, in case people are like, a capital stack? What are you talking about, Kathy? If somebody else was building an apartment, they would often look at this and say, okay, I'm going to have this many apartments and they're going to pay me this much rent. Here's my income side. It's going to cost me this much. Is the income more than the cost? Then I'm doing it. If not, I'm not. When you're doing that for affordable housing, the rents will never cover the costs. That just isn't how that works. So then it becomes the question of how else can I get capital to build this if I can't count on the rents covering those costs. And in some cases, there's looking at the hard loans that you're going to get a loan from this particular mortgage lender, and you definitely are going to be paying on it this amount each time as you go. And there's also soft loans where you may be able to get some of the land donated by the city, or some other option where they're like, you have a loan but we're not going to expect you to pay it right now, maybe at a future date, or maybe we're going to waive it altogether, particularly if you keep it as affordable housing for this amount of time. That's all part of what you got to negotiate ahead of time so that you can in fact do this work. The other thing that I found very interesting, I went out to San Francisco for NeighborWorks America, and they call them CDFIs. They're community development financial institutions. They're designed specifically so that, in fact, they can help these kind of construction projects. And this particular one formed specifically because they wanted to help members of the NeighborWorks America network across the country. So they said, if you're thinking about this, we'd be happy to come talk to you about what we could do to help with capital. Talk to us, call us. We may be a bridge loan for you, in case people are like, what's a bridge loan?
You're building bridges.
If you lay out the plans in order to start this construction, and someone tells you, well, a year from now, I will have the funding for you. Well, that's great a year from now, but I have construction to do right now. What they're saying is, we'll give you a bridge loan to get you through that so that when you get that stack of money, you can pay us off, and the only thing you'll owe us for is the interest. Okay, great. It's those kind of things that you have to learn to do in order to make something like this work. Stuff that typical developers don't think about because they're not trying to build housing that it actually would be affordable. And again, sometimes people ask me, what do you mean by affordable housing? Like, what are you talking about? In the ideal world, a person wouldn't have to spend more than 30% of their income on housing. So think about that for a second, because how often do we have people who spend way more than 30% on housing? And the concern then becomes, what aren't they taking care of? Are they not able to get the health that they need, the health care, because they can't pay for it? Are they not eating properly because they can't pay for it? Are their kids not getting what they need because they can't pay for it? We could go on and on and on. And so it becomes the question of, what are we doing so that we can make sure that housing falls into a appropriate range for where people are at in their income. This is the work that's in front of us.
And you know, it is challenging, especially with young people starting out. You know, to try to afford all that, to have a down payment. People who are new to the country, people who are just new to home ownership, and yet that's the way most of our families build wealth.
Exactly. And so it's the opportunity to say, how do I step into that? And I am going to bring in the seniors, because frankly, when you look at the numbers statistically, we have a number of seniors living at the poverty level. And so in this particular case, how would they pay those things if they didn't have some of the other help that's available along the way? Some of them want to stay in their homes. So then how do we help them do that in a way that's safe? What other types of, it may be through a rehab process. It may be saying, can we find a way, because you may be the only person in a very big house, could you rent out other sections of the house and allow a second family who's living with you help with the gardening, the lawn, the maintenance type projects that you're not able to do anymore, as an exchange, if you will. Do we set up more secondary apartments, those kind of things?
So if people are interested in learning more about how they can take advantage of these many opportunities, how do they get a hold of you, and when are you here?
We are here Monday through Friday usually, and if not, our phone system will direct you to our voicemail so you can catch us. The phone number is 608-647-4949. They can reach Andrea Lippens. She will take care of the intake and get people started. She's at extension 302. Johnny Hawkins is at extension 308 for any of the home education, counseling. She'll get you connected with our counselors. And then I'm at 305. And I was also going to say, if you're interested in working with us on the community impact measures, we'd be happy to hear from you. And or if you're interested in being part of the housing action team and saying, what can we do for housing in this area? We'd like to be able to hear from folks and pull together the people who'd most like to really start to take that on, kind of dig into that part of the process. The other thing that you can do is check out our website. It is nhsrcwi.org. And by email, it would be Kathy, Cathy, @nhsrcwi.org.
Okay, well, I hope you get a lot of response. And thank you for telling us about this very interesting and important aspect of community life. And we wish you a good NeighborWorks week and an excellent 40th anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in. We know people around the community have been enjoying Pine Valley's treasure hunt of late. And we hope you'll come back next week and every week to see our town.